Hello and welcome, everyone. We're going to get it started here in the next minute or so. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Chelsea Traceder with MVP. Thank you so much for being here. I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Dr. Tom Goyne this morning from both Aberdeen Audiology as well as Practical Audiology. Without further ado, we've got a fair amount to cover this morning in only 30 minutes. So I am going to turn it over to Dr. Tom Goyne.
Thanks for having me. This is a topic I always like to talk about, and it's nice to collaborate with the folks at Pivot and MVP. So thanks for joining. If this is the first thing in the morning, thanks for coming. If this is your lunch, thanks for coming. Um, you know, we're going to talk about some things that I hope everyone finds very practical. They're also evidence-based, and they can take into their practice right away, starting today, perhaps. A little bit about me. I'm a private practice owner in the Philadelphia suburbs. I've had it for alarmingly 19 years now, which is kind of amazing. We have several offices, a team of audiologists and staff. We work with tinnitus, hearing aids, vestibular, auditory processing, cochlear implants. We do a lot of stuff. Everything I'm going to talk about today can really apply to any of those areas. And so no matter what sort of practice you have, I think you'll be able to take something from this. I'm also an adjunct professor at Drexel University, formerly Salus. I dabble in some research a little bit. I've been the president of PAA, and I have a consulting practice, practical audiology, because I like to keep things practical. So that is a little bit about me, maybe even too much, some might say. Our agenda, we're maybe a little ambitious. We'll see here, but we'll see how quick we can get through it. First, Chelsea will actually talk about what just sort of what is conversion ratio, how do you measure it, how MVP helps you measure it and saves you, frankly, a tremendous amount of time in measuring it. And you can also sort of compare yourself to other practices of similar size and scope. She'll show you that. Then we'll get a little bit into case studies, and then we'll spend much more time on, well, how do you actually improve upon your success rate or conversion ratio or help rate or whatever you want to call it. And then towards the end, we'll have time for questions and answers. And so if you have questions as we go, we probably won't stop in the middle to answer anything, but type them into the chat and we'll get to them as time goes by. So that's our agenda. I'm going to stop sharing here and let Chelsea share her slides, and then I'll be back with mine.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. You want to give me a thumbs up? Can you see my slides okay?
You're good.
Okay, great. Good to go. Okay, awesome. Well, again, yes, just absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Tom Goyne here with us today. He is an amazing resource that I've learned a ton from over many years, and I'm excited for you guys to get to learn from him today as well. As he mentioned, I thought I would kick us off by just talking a little bit about conversion rate, kind of what it is, why it matters. If you've been following any of the content that MVP has been putting out for the last 18 months or so, you'll probably know that as an industry, we are experiencing some softness in new patient acquisition across the MVP data set. Of course, your practice may or may not be experiencing that in your local market, but industry as a whole, we're hearing this from all kinds of players in the space. So I think this topic is particularly timely if you've got fewer patients, new patients coming through the door. Being even more astute at converting the ones that do come is as important as it's ever been. And I think there's a couple of reasons why a focus on conversion rate is really important. Oftentimes, it is one of the cheapest growth levers you have in your practice. You're not having to pay for more leads, do additional marketing, anything like that. You're just simply getting more out of the traffic that you already have. Another factor here is that little small improvements can really compound. I know I've heard Tom talk about this, and I think he will today, but it doesn't take a lot of movement in conversion rate for the dollars that flow from that to be really impactful in your business. And finally, it's an early warning system. So, a dip in conversion rate can often be the first signal that something is awry in the patient journey that might need your attention. So, getting after it quickly and early can save you a lot of heartache in the future. Okay, so what's conversion rate? Again, like Tom said, a lot of different names: help rate, conversion rate, whatever you want to call it. It basically is conversions on the top divided by opportunities on the bottom. That top, the numerator, that's really easy, right? A sale either happened or it didn't. It's 1 unit or 2 units or 0 units, but uh, that part there's not usually a ton of debate about. The denominator, on the other hand, that number that goes on the bottom, that's traditionally what's been much more complicated. So, what actually counts as an opportunity? Is it every new patient appointment who comes through the door? Is it only certain consultations and appointment types? What about patients who weren't technically or clinically qualified for some reason? But the point here is if you get the denominator wrong and you're calculating conversion rate, it's sort of meaningless, right? So, that's why one of the things we've developed here at MVP is this concept of custom opportunity logic, which allows you as the practice owner or manager to decide precisely what qualifies as an opportunity in your practice. So I just threw an example up here on the screen. This is not a set formula or anything like that, but one way you might think about what qualifies as an opportunity in your practice is looking at patients who already have hearing aids and how old those hearing aids are. Do you want to consider someone an opportunity if their hearing aids are 3 years old or not until they're 4 years old, something like that? You might want to also layer in hearing loss level. So is somebody with normal or mild hearing a candidate? In most practices, we're going to say no, right? So do you want to set something like the hearing loss has to be at least mild to moderate in the worst year? So layering in some kind of clinical criteria around hearing loss level. How about when you're looking at your schedule and you've got a new patient on the schedule, but you don't know if they have hearing loss yet. They haven't come to you for a test, but you do know from the intake that they are 70 years old. So in the absence of hearing aid and hearing loss information, you could use patient age as a fallback to understand what's likely an opportunity on your schedule. Of course, a 70-year-old could still come in and have normal hearing, at which point we would remove them from the opportunity logic. But just a few different ways to think about who might be a candidate for treatment in your practice. And of course, you can always layer on appointment types too, because maybe you never want to count a clean and check as an opportunity. Maybe you do if their hearing aids are 3.5 years old. So a lot of different ways you can do this, but the point here is that two different practices can have wildly different conversion rates because of what they're counting and not counting as opportunities. And you can't set one definition that's going to work across the entire industry. Practices have different business models, different specialty areas. And so being able to fold that into your opportunity logic, I think is critical. Another thing I wanted to talk about really quick is the concept of reconciled versus rolling conversion rate. So rolling conversion rate, this is a real-time moving view. So this is going to update continuously as new opportunities and conversions come in. So rather than looking at, this set of 100 patients and whether those 100 converted, so say 60 of those converted, so 60 out of 100, that would be a 60% reconciled conversion rate. A rolling conversion rate looks at like an uncohorted set of patients. So say over the last 3 months, you saw 100 patients and 50 of those have converted, and you've had 50 conversions total. This would divide 50 over 100 and say your rolling conversion rate is 50%. So we're not looking at whether those specific 100 patients have converted. We're just looking at total conversions, total opportunities, and it gives you a more near time, real time look at whether your conversion rate might be improving or it might be slipping a little bit. So I think you need both. This reconciled one is going to be important to look at to say, hey, after the close of last quarter, where did we end up? How did our conversion rate shake out? Rolling is going to allow you to see in more near real time, are things changing that we need to keep an eye on? The other thing that I think is important about conversion rate is that you can't necessarily just look at it as one headline number because that can mask variation underneath. So there's a lot of different ways in MVP you can drill into conversion rate. One of the most obvious that a lot of practices focus on is by provider. So overall, as a practice, you might have a decent conversion rate. Chances are you've got providers way up here and then some others that are way down here. Another interesting way to look at it is by referral source. So certain channels are probably more likely to bring in patients that are ready to move forward, and this can help inform your marketing spend. Other cuts you can do, by clinic location, by appointment type, things like that. But the goal here is to find specific levers that are impacting your conversion rate rather than just a general trend that's a little bit harder to action on. Is your conversion rate actually good? So, a conversion rate of 55% in isolation, that could be great or that could be not so great. MVP offers benchmarking across our data set of, something like 1,300 clinics in the US. It can look at practices that are of a similar size to you in your region across the nation and allow you to compare your performance on all kinds of metrics, but conversion rate being one of them. So this helps you understand whether your conversion rate's actually good. So you can compare to you versus yourself in the past or goals you've set for you, but also to other practices as well. And one thing I wanted to tease really quick, this is, I think, especially exciting because of some of the work that Tom does, but we are going to be rolling out ancillary conversions in MVP. So historically, we've just been looking at hearing aid sales as a source of conversion and opportunity, but coming very soon to MVP is the ability to set opportunity logic and conversion logic for things besides hearing aids. So that could be tinnitus treatment, products and services, APD treatment packages, things like that. So just wanted to do a little plug for that. If you're already using MVP, keep an eye out. That'll be coming soon. And if you're not using MVP and you have ancillary services as part of your practice, we will soon be able to differentiate conversion rates on those items as well. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that. So, okay, so moving along. Let's get into a case study. Someone who we got to work and helped them with their conversion ratio. So this was a practice. This is how they were in the beginning. So this is the before. They were doing on average, depending upon the month, somewhere's around 18 hearing aids a month. Like all of our practices, some months were a little bit better, some were a little bit worse, but that was the average. And those 18 units were coming off of 19 consultations a month. From some different sources, some advertising, some referrals, some word of mouth. Sort of a combination of things, kind of like a lot of our practices. And their conversion ratio at the time was about 47%, which I find to be somewhat typical in working with a lot of practices. A lot of folks are sort of somewhere between 40 and 50%. And the way, by the way, the numerator and the denominator worked here was patients who successfully made it through a trial period in the numerator. And then the denominator was patients who had made an appointment to talk about hearing aids. So I forget what exactly they called their appointment type, but it could be old patients, it could be new patients, existing patients or new patients. But at any rate, that's how they were at 47%. We actually tracked it for a bit before we did anything. I wouldn't want to mess up a practice that's already doing pretty well with that. And those 18 units were turning into about $42,000 in revenue per month. We got to work. We did some training, over some time with the providers. And we didn't change anything other than how they were approaching consultations with their patients. We didn't spend more on marketing, and you can see it was pretty steady. It's stuck at 19 consultations a month. That didn't change too much. But really, the only thing that changed was going from a 47% conversion ratio to a 60%. And that took them from 18 units a month to 23 a month on average. And that resulted in $53,000 of revenue per month. So a nice little change just by changing conversion ratio. And you don't need to be a math major, but if you can extrapolate that out over time, that's $135,000 over the course of a year in additional revenue without any additional spending on advertising, without any additional spending on marketing, without paying for Google ads or Facebook ads or completely redoing the website or paying for SEO or AI, whatever. All we did was change how they approached conversations with their patients, and it turned into this kind of a difference in their annual revenue, which is a pretty big deal for a lot of practices, to say the least. And so this just gets back to what Chelsea was saying earlier: is it's very inexpensive, but yet it can make a huge difference. And then, I mean, look, money's great. We all have to keep the lights on. Some of us have a bunch of kids to put through college. Some of us will someday, right? We have payrolls to meet. We have vacations to go on. And so, the money's nice, but we also got into all of this to help people too. I mean, we shouldn't just be doing this in order to make money. We're doing this to help people too. And if you do the math on this particular practice, yes, they were making the additional revenue, but they were also helping 29 more people over the course of a year on average because of this increase from 47% to 60%. So if you think about it, I mean, without being overly dramatic, and it is not a one-to-one link between hearing loss and cognitive decline, but it's certainly, there's a relationship there without a doubt. And think about the better cognitive health that those 29 people are going to have because they're hearing better. Think about how much smoother the Thanksgiving dinners are going to go because people are hearing better. So there's both a financial reward to improving your conversion ratio, but there's also an intrinsic reward because you're helping more people, which is a good thing. And that's one of the reasons why we do all this. So how do we either maintain a good conversion ratio or improve our conversion ratio from where it is? And so, being an audiologist and a part-time professor and dabbling in research from time to time, I like to stick with evidence. And there's actually evidence that supports how you approach and have conversations with patients. And so here's a particular study by Adam Grant. You may see him around at podcasting and social media and things. He used to actually coincidentally live up the street from me. He's a Penn professor. And he did a study, I guess 14 years ago now, looking at personality type, introversion versus extroversion, or the type in the middle where you're a little bit of both, called an ambivert, in terms of who was better at sales. Now, this wasn't in audiology. I forget what field exactly it was in, but basically what they found was that people in the middle, not introverts and not extroverts, but people in the middle were actually the best in terms of sales data. And, I highlighted a passage from the study here. Compared with introverts, ambiverts are more likely to display the requisite levels of enthusiasm and assertiveness. In other words, to lead the discussion, in our case, lead the discussion, lead the appointment. But at the same time, they weren't so extroverted that they were sort of dominating the conversation, or in our case, dominating the appointment. And it allowed the patient, or in this case, the customer, to share what they were hoping to accomplish, what their problem areas were, and that sort of thing. So I kind of like to have a rule that you stick to, where in consultations such as this, you don't do more than half the talking. If you're doing more than half the talking, you're probably not conducting things as efficiently as you could, and you're not hearing from the patient everything that you need to hear from them in order for them to move forward. Now, sometimes when I bring this up with audiologists, they look at me like I have seven heads, because they think, well, if I'm not doing most of the talking, then what are we doing in the appointment? Well, you're asking them questions. You're asking the patients questions. And, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the method of motivational interviewing. It's a psychological technique. It was developed in the 80s. It's evidence-based. It was really developed originally to help people break addiction cycles. And it's geared towards helping people find their own internal motivations for behavior change. And it originally started in addiction recovery, but it moved on to nutrition, exercise science. There's some audiologists that use it. It's made its way into all sorts of different clinical endeavors. And what's kind of interesting is, if you pick up a book on modern sales, modern ethical sales techniques, and you read through it, a lot of it sounds like motivational interviewing, actually. And so again, the goal with motivational interviewing is to ask the patient questions that uncover their own internal motivations or their apprehensions for moving forward with treatment. And, as I always sort of say, folks don't pick up the phone in order to sit in a soundproof booth for half an hour, listen to all sorts of crazy beeps, and then you describe what this crazy chart means and what hearing aids do and all this sort of stuff. No, they came in to have some problems solved. And so it's your job to find out what those motivations were, what those problems are. And so, I think, some of us use the cozy. You can do it informally, but you need to ask the patient, what listening situations do you want to hear better in? And that might be the most important question we ask our patients. What situations do you want to hear better in? One, it tells you and it helps you formulate in your mind what might be the best treatment package for them, or set of hearing aids for them, or whatever. But also, the fact that they're saying it out loud means they're more likely to follow through, because they're saying out loud, I want to hear better in restaurants, or I want to get to sleep quicker and not be so bothered by my tinnitus. Or, well, my kid is struggling in school. I would like them to do better with auditory processing and reading. So you need to ask that question. There's also some research out there that shows that if you help people in 3 or more listening situations, they're more likely to perceive benefit. So it's good to get at least 3. More is even better, but 3 is pretty good. And then it's also good to ask a question like, well, is there something that prevented you from doing something about this sooner? We all know the vast majority of our patients, the hearing loss did not happen overnight. I mean, we occasionally run into that, unfortunately, but most of the time it's a slow, gradual thing. And there were many points along the line where they could have done something about it, but chose not to or didn't. And it's good to know what those apprehensions or barriers were, so that you don't accidentally go down one of those streets, or make a recommendation that's sort of the same as what they've heard before that has led them to not move forward. So I think these are some great questions. There's others, but these are probably the most powerful ones. And then the other thing to do, and again, there's science and evidence behind this. The other thing to do is not, you have to resist the temptation to lecture or correct. And I think, there's something in the DNA of audiologists that we really like to teach. I mean, here I'm doing it now for half an hour, right? We like doing it. And we really want to make sure people do well with their hearing, because we know the ramifications if they don't. And so we sometimes start to lecture them, sometimes start to correct them, inadvertently, not on purpose, but inadvertently might even make them feel a little bit bad about not doing something sooner. And there's this psychological phenomenon that many of us have. Some might call it a heel dig, but the formal name is psychological reactance. And I think it first showed up in the literature around 1966. But basically, when someone tells us what to do, we perceive it as a direct threat to our personal autonomy. We kind of want to be part of the tribe, but we also want to have our own personal autonomy. And this triggers an automatic emotional pushback to regain control, often resulting in doing the exact opposite. And if you can think about it, I'm sure you can think of instances either in work life or personal life where you've sort of told somebody what to do and they dug their heels in and did the opposite. Or you can think of a situation where you did that, where you were admonished for doing something, maybe even very nicely and very professionally, but you kind of dug in your heels and did the opposite. So, the bottom line here is, try not to do too much talking, ask lots of good questions, and really try not to get into teaching too much, correcting too much, admonishing too much. Let's stick to their internal motivations for moving forward. Another thing to think about here is discover and explore their objections. So it's incredibly rare where you recommend a treatment plan and the patient just says, sure, yeah, let's do it. Whatever you say, doc, let's go. Like, can we start now? I mean, occasionally you run into that, but usually there's questions and or objections. And if you think about it, it's really kind of rare that any of us hears, no, I don't want to do that. Most of the time, what we hear is, okay, I need to go home and think about it. Right? We either get yes, let's move forward, or we get, I want to go home and think about it. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with you very nicely, in a curious tone, asking them, well, what is it that you need to think about? And, not not, sort of, well, what is it you need to think about? It's pretty clear what to do here. No, well, what is it you need to think about? Maybe we didn't go over something well enough. What is it you need to think about? And these are some examples of some things that you might hear when you ask that question. You might hear, well, I'm not sure this treatment plan will help me. Well, let's say this is hearing aids that we're talking about here. You can say to the patient, well, first of all, I'm confident it will. I've worked with many cases like yours before. I don't see why this wouldn't go well. But don't forget, if this doesn't go well, we have a trial period. You can return the hearing aids. You can get credit for the hearing aids. Some of us may do full, some of us do partial, but whatever. But they can it's a state law. They can return them and get a refund. And so I always remind patients of that. And it's interesting to me how often they will sometimes forget about that. I will have told them about that earlier in the conversation, but they'll forget about it. And I'll kind of have to remind them. And a lot of times I'll do that and I'll say, oh, right. Good point. Good point. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess, let's go ahead. Let's move forward. Um, Another good one to think about is, sometimes you'll get them saying, well, it's a lot of money, or I'm not sure it's worth all the money, or I'm not sure it's worth the expenditure, or, the money is a problem, something along the lines of, saying something about money. And I think what's incredibly important here is to determine, and again, ask in a very curious, non-judgmental tone, um, is it, and try and find out, is it more that they really do want to move forward, but it really is a financial strain? Or is it more that they're just skeptical this is going to help and therefore they don't want to risk the money? And so it's very important to figure it out. Is it that they don't think they have a problem? They're not convinced this is going to help them. They're not convinced this is going to make things better. Or they're convinced of all that. It's just more a financial issue for them. And so obviously, depending upon which one, they say, you can offer different options. Obviously, there's payment plans, or you can revisit some things early in the conversation that's making them not sure that this will help. But it's important to find out. You need to find out what the barriers are before you can move past them. So the take-home message here, and then we'll get to questions. You know, as Chelsea and I both talked about, seemingly small improvements in conversion ratios can have significant impacts on your profitability. The practice I talked about earlier, we didn't take them from 35% to 75%. We took them from 47 to 60. It's a 13% jump, right? I had to do the math there for a second. It wasn't a huge change, but it made a big difference in their bottom line. Uh, and really, much of what we've been talking about here is, it's modern, it's ethical, it's evidence-based. Really, it's just good communication. It's not Jedi mind tricks. It's not pressure. It's certainly not an information dump that overwhelms them. It's just good techniques for following a conversation. And, a lot of this is backed by research. This isn't stuff that I've figured out here in my basement over the years. This is stuff that's based in evidence, and I have seen work in many practices, including my own. So those are the take-home messages, and here's some more about what I do on the consulting side of things, how to get in touch with me. I have some reviews on there that I'm kind of proud of, if I do say so myself. And with that, I think we can open things up to questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Tom. That was awesome.
Thank
I know
you.
we're close to time here, so if you have to hop off, feel free. But we do have a couple questions that have come in the Q&A, and if you have a question that you haven't asked yet, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and Tom and I are happy to stay on and answer those. So the question that I have here is, what resources are there out there to improve conversion rate for people who are interested in doing that?
Good question. Good question. So, I would consider myself a resource. I'm
I
available, but
agree.
yeah, but there's also some books. I'm looking at one right here on my desk. Admittedly, I haven't gotten too far through it because it was just published not that long ago. But it's motivational interviewing for hearing care providers. I think the author's name is Bobby Joe Marlett. I think she's Canadian. I flipped through it. I thought what I saw was great. There's also a great book. It's might be 15 years old at this point, but it's a book by Daniel Pink called "To Sell As Human." And again, it's kind of about sales, but it's kind of just about good communication. And it just sort of, it starts with the premise that no matter what you do, whether you are a stay-at-home parent, an audiologist, an engineer, a coach, a teacher, you have to persuade people sometimes to see your way of things, to change behaviors or whatever. And so it's just a good book for just sort of, sales is not a dirty word. It's something all of us have to engage in no matter where we are in life. And so I think that's pretty good. So those two books, the textbooks on motivational interviewing are good. So yeah, I think those are all pretty good resources.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Okay, this next question is about how you address conversion rate with providers. So, providers who are not the owner. I'm sure you could answer this both, in terms of your own practice, but potentially in your consulting work as well. How do you talk to providers about conversion rate? Do you talk to them about conversion rate? How often? What tools do you use? Do you compensate? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of this doesn't come naturally to us as audiologists. We sort of default to teaching or testing and teaching, I should say. We pop them in the booth and then we bring them out and we describe what the audiogram is, and we describe what directional microphones are, and we describe what in the ear and over the ear is, and all that stuff. And then we ask them what they want to do about it, and they say they want to go home and think. And really, you know, the better thing to do is to get providers comfortable with asking questions, comfortable with silence. Sometimes you have to ask the question and give the patient a chance to respond, and don't just try and fill the silence with your own talking. There's that. I also think that while this is a webinar on conversion ratio, and you definitely need to be looking at conversion ratio, I think you also need to look at some other things, sort of more, what we would call process goals. So, hey, at the end of every consultation, sort of review, did I do more than half the talking? Did I ask them some of those really important, powerful questions? Did I find out their own internal motivations? So, yes, we need to pay attention to conversion ratio. I mean, I look at it constantly, but I think it's also good to either, if you can find a way to quantify it, or at least qualitatively look at, am I following those evidence-based steps? Am I asking questions? Am I avoiding teaching and lecturing? And you can do that. You can review that at the end of the day with audiologists. You can review that at the end of a month or a quarter. But I think if you just sort of, say, hey, we need to get to 67%, and here's how you're going to do it. I think people need more guidance than that, because it's whatever it is in the audiology DNA. This doesn't come naturally for a lot of us, and I also think it needs to be regular. It's not something that you can just do one quarterly meeting on and then you're good. I think you also have to monitor it, because I know within my practice I've seen the conversion ratio go up and it goes down, and some of that is just statistical regression, but some of it is, you sort of, just like equipment can drift out of calibration, so can your conversations. And so sometimes you have to revisit it.
Great. Super helpful. Okay. The next question is someone saying that the resistance that they usually get is, my hearing doesn't cause me enough problems to spend the money. Any thoughts on how you'd respond to a patient who said that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, some of it they might be right. Like if they have a very, very mild hearing loss and they lead a really quiet life, yeah, might not be much of an issue. But I think that's not most people, though. Most people, the hearing is, much worse than that, and it is causing problems. I think you can ask other questions. You can ask, well, you don't, and again, you have to be curious and non-judgmental, but you have to ask the tone, in a tone of voice, a good tone of voice, is there someone at home that thinks this might be a problem? Or is there somebody who urged you to make this appointment? Or, you might say, well, what are the situations you'd like to hear better? They list them, and then say, well, so how frustrating is that when you don't hear in those situations? I think, if you start asking curious questions and you start digging, you will find that hearing is a problem. The only way it's not a problem is if they are, um, you know, a monk on a monastery at the top of a mountain somewhere. And if they're that, they're probably not in your office in the first place. They're there because on some level it is a problem, either for them or their spouse or whatever. I also think though that we didn't talk about this, but companion rate, sort of a close cousin to conversion ratio. That's a good one. If you can get somebody if you can get them bringing their spouse in, their adult child in, some significant other, we sort of phrase it on the phone as, has anyone been urging you to make this appointment? Or would they like to be part of the decision? You're never, ever, ever going to get 100% companion rate. Even 50% is tough. But the more you can have someone come along, the less likely it is you're going to hear that because um, frankly they know it's a problem and they don't want they're not going to say that in front of the spouse because they know they will be corrected, so there's some accountability there. So I think it's like a lot of these things that we're talking about here, it's kind of a combination of things. There's no one magic bullet, it's sort of a combination of things that will help it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tom. Okay, that wraps up all the questions we have. I know we're a few minutes over. I want to thank everyone for joining and for staying on with us. Hope you found it valuable and interesting. We did record, so if anyone needs a copy of the recording, we'll be sending that out, or you're welcome to reach out to me directly. But thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. And thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks.